I used to think every family had its little secrets, the kind that come up in jokes at Thanksgiving or stories that begin with, "We never told you this, but." I never imagined that one of those secrets would redefine my entire identity. It started at a family gathering that was supposed to be ordinary, a Sunday lunch at my parents' house in the suburbs. The smell of baked ham and rosemary potatoes filled the kitchen, and my mom was humming along to Fleetwood Mac like she always did when she cooked. It was comfortable, familiar, safe. My sister Emily had just had her first baby, and the afternoon was supposed to be about him. Tiny fingers, soft coos, and that baby smell everyone seems to love. But looking back, I think everyone else already knew what was coming. Everyone except me. After lunch, my dad suggested we all sit in the living room. "We've been meaning to talk to you about something important," he said, glancing at my mom in a way that made my stomach tighten. His voice had that trembling quality, not anger, not sadness, but the kind that comes from holding something heavy for too long. I remember laughing nervously. "You guys aren't getting divorced, are you?" Mom smiled faintly, but didn't laugh. That's when I noticed her hands shaking as she wiped invisible crumbs from her lap. "No, sweetheart," she said softly. It's about you." The next few seconds stretched into eternity. Every possibility ran through my mind. Illness, debt, maybe some mistake from my childhood. But what came next didn't even feel real. "Honey," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears, "you're adopted." I blinked. For a moment, I honestly thought she was joking. "What? No, what are you talking about?" My dad's voice broke as he tried to steady himself. "We adopted you when you were a baby. We wanted to tell you when you were older, but then time passed and we thought it didn't matter anymore. You were our child. You are our child." Everything in me froze. The words didn't make sense. I'd grown up in that house, gone to school down the street, shared DNA jokes with my dad because we both had the same crooked smile. Or at least I thought we did. I couldn't breathe. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "You're saying I'm not your..." I couldn't even finish the sentence. Mom reached out for my hand, but I pulled it away instinctively. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. The people I loved most in the world, the ones who tucked me in, patched my scraped knees, taught me how to drive, had been keeping something so fundamental from me for 33 years. I remember standing up, pacing, my voice shaking. "You lied to me. My whole life has been a lie." My sister started crying, saying that she'd found out when she was 15, but had promised not to tell me. That broke me even more. The betrayal wasn't just from my parents. It was from everyone. That night, I drove home in silence. No music, no thoughts I could hold on to. Just a numb, hollow ache that made everything feel unreal. I looked in the mirror at every stoplight, trying to see the stranger in my reflection. When I got home, I pulled out every old photo album I had. Birthdays, vacations, graduations. I studied my parents' faces, searching for clues I'd somehow missed all these years. And in that haze of disbelief, I started noticing small things. The lack of resemblance. The old joke from a family friend about me being the mailman's kid. The way my mom would tense up whenever I asked about my birth story. Maybe the signs had always been there. I just never looked for them. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark with a cup of cold coffee, replaying my life like a movie. Every memory felt rewritten. Every "I love you" felt tainted with the question, Was it real if it was built on a lie? But what hurt most wasn't the adoption itself, it was the silence. 33 years of love that now came with a question mark. And that was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a head that felt like it had been stuffed with fog. The sunlight streaming through my blinds was too bright, too normal for a world that had so completely changed overnight. For a few minutes, I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to decide whether to call my parents or to pretend none of it had happened. But pretending wasn't possible anymore. Once the truth cracks open, there's no way to unsee it. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A text from Mom. "We love you. Please come talk when you're ready." I read it 10 times, my emotions flickering between rage and heartbreak. I didn't know if I wanted to scream or hug her. The thought of seeing them again made my chest tighten, but the need for answers burned stronger. By evening, I was driving back to their house, my hands gripping the steering wheel like it might hold me together. When I walked in, the house felt smaller somehow, the walls closer, the air heavier. My parents were sitting on the couch, looking years older than they had just the day before. Mom's eyes were rimmed red, and Dad was holding a manila envelope on his lap. "I don't even know where to start," I said quietly. Dad looked at the envelope, then back at me. "We've kept everything. All the papers, the letters, the photos. We thought maybe you'd want to see them someday." He handed me the envelope like it was an artifact from another life, which, in a way, it was. My name was written on the front in my mother's handwriting, "For when the time is right." Inside were official-looking documents, birth certificates, adoption decrees, faded Polaroids of a baby with a tuft of dark hair. And then, tucked in the back, a letter, written in elegant cursive on yellowed stationery. "To the wonderful people who will raise my child." I froze. My birth mother. My heart pounded as I read her words, full of hope, sorrow, and impossible love. She wrote about being young, about not being able to provide, about wanting me to have a life filled with safety, opportunity, and love. There was no bitterness in her tone, just heartbreak and grace. By the time I finished, tears blurred the ink. I sat there, unable to speak. My parents didn't say anything either. We just sat in the quiet, 3 people bound together by love and by a truth we'd all failed to face. Finally, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since yesterday. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mom's voice trembled. "We were afraid, sweetheart. You were ours from the moment we held you. We thought if we told you too early, it might make you feel like less than. And then 1 year turned into 5, 5 into 10, and by the time you were grown, it felt too late. We didn't want to lose you." Lose me. Those words hit hard, because in trying not to lose me, they had. I wanted to stay angry. I wanted to make them understand how deep the betrayal felt. But as I looked at my mom's trembling hands and my dad's tearful eyes, all I saw were 2 people who'd acted out of love. Flawed, fearful love, but love all the same. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with piecing together my origin story. I went through every old photo, scanning faces in the background for someone who might have known. I called Emily, who confessed that she'd always suspected I would find out someday. "I hated keeping it from you," she said over the phone, her voice breaking. "Mom made me promise. I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me from what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. From the truth. And that truth had become a living thing, following me everywhere, demanding attention. I couldn't concentrate at work. My friends noticed I was distracted, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. How do you even start a sentence like that? Hey, turns out my entire life story was edited for my own good. A week later, I did something I never thought I'd do. I reached out to the adoption agency listed on the papers. They told me my birth mother's name, Laura Bennett, and that she'd requested contact if the adoptee ever wished to connect. My hands shook as I wrote her a letter. Nothing fancy, just honest words. Hi, Laura. My name is, well, the name you gave me is probably different now. I just found out that I'm adopted and I wanted to reach out. I don't know what I'm looking for exactly. Maybe just to understand. Thank you for giving me life. I hope you're okay. I mailed it, half hoping it wouldn't reach her, half desperate for it to change everything. While waiting for a reply, I started going through the family archives, boxes in my parents' attic filled with letters, photo albums, even a VHS tape from my first birthday. I watched the tape one night, alone in my apartment. Mom was holding me, laughing as I smeared frosting all over her face. Dad was behind the camera, saying, "Smile, birthday girl." The love was real. You could feel it, see it in every frame. Whatever else was hidden beneath it, that love was pure. And that realization that love and secrecy could coexist confused me more than anything else. Then, one evening, a small white envelope appeared in my mailbox. The handwriting was neat and old-fashioned. The return address, L. Bennett, Springfield, Missouri. I sat on my porch, letter in hand, heart racing. When I opened it, a small note fell into my lap. Dear Emily, I've thought about this day for 33 years. I never stopped wondering about you. If you're open to it, I'd love to meet. There's so much I want to tell you about who you are and who I was when I let you go. With love, Laura. The paper trembled in my hands. For the first time since the secret had been revealed, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not confusion, but curiosity. Maybe this wasn't just a story about betrayal after all. Maybe it was about rediscovery. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the smallest spark of hope. There was a chance for understanding. 2 weeks after Laura's letter arrived, I found myself sitting in a corner booth of a small cafe in downtown Springfield, Missouri, hands trembling around a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. I kept rehearsing what I'd say when she walked in. "Hi, I'm Emily," or, "I guess, your daughter." It all sounded ridiculous in my head. How do you greet the person who gave you life but vanished from it before you could form a memory? Every time the bell over the door jingled, my heart leapt. And then, finally, she was there. She looked nothing like I'd imagined. No dramatic resemblance, no mirror image moment. She was in her late 50s, with soft brown eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled into a low ponytail. But there was something familiar in the way she smiled. Shy, a little nervous, like she was afraid to take up space. "Emily?" she asked softly. I stood up too fast, nearly knocking over my coffee. "Yeah, that's me." We both laughed awkwardly, then hugged. A fragile, uncertain embrace that somehow felt both new and ancient. For a moment, I felt her heartbeat against mine, and I realized how surreal this was. Two strangers who shared DNA, standing in a cafe pretending they weren't about to cry. We sat down, and for a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I've dreamed of this for so long. You have no idea." I nodded, trying to keep my composure. I guess I'm still trying to wrap my head around it all. I only found out a few weeks ago. Her face fell. "They never told you?" "Not until recently." She sighed and looked down at her hands. "I always hoped they would, but I also understood why they might not. Adoption is complicated." That word, complicated, became the theme of the afternoon. She told me about being 19 and terrified, living in a small town where being a single pregnant girl was the fastest way to become an outcast. Her parents pushed her toward adoption, and even though part of her wanted to run away with me and figure it out alone, she knew she couldn't. "I wasn't strong enough then," she said, her voice breaking, "but I wanted you to have more than I could ever give." I sat there, listening to the woman who was technically my mother, but who felt like a stranger, telling me about my own origin story, one I hadn't even known existed. And then she said something that hit me like a punch to the chest. "She used to drive past your house sometimes," she whispered. "After the adoption, I stayed in the area for a few years. I knew where you were, but I didn't dare come closer. Once, when you were about 6, I saw you playing in the yard with your mom. You were laughing so hard, and she looked so happy. I realized then I'd made the right choice, but I cried for weeks." Tears rolled on my face before I could stop them. There was something unbearable about imagining her sitting in a car, watching her daughter from a distance, loving me silently. I reached across the table and took her hand. I said quietly, "You didn't do anything wrong. You gave me a good life. I just wish I'd known sooner." She squeezed my hand, her eyes wet. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." We spent hours talking about her life, her favorite books, the music she loved. Turns out we shared a lot of little quirks, a weird obsession with thunderstorms, the habit of reading the last page of a book before starting it, even the same nervous laugh. By the time we parted ways, the sky had turned a bruised purple, and I felt something I hadn't felt since the secret came out, a strange sense of peace, not wholeness, not yet, but the beginning of it. Back home, my parents were waiting for me to call. I told them about the meeting, about how kind Laura was, about how she didn't blame them for anything. My mom cried, out of relief, I think. "I'm glad she's a good person," she said. "I was always afraid you'd find someone who might complicate things." "She didn't," I said gently. "If anything, she made things make sense." Over the next few weeks, I tried to navigate this new, tangled web of relationships. I visited Laura again, met her husband, saw photos of her other 2 children, my half-siblings. They were warm, welcoming, curious. But going home afterward always felt like walking between 2 worlds. With my adoptive family, everything looked the same on the surface. Same Sunday dinners, same jokes, same family group texts. But there was a new layer underneath now. Awareness, awkward pauses, the occasional too long silence when someone mentioned genetics or family resemblance. One night, Emily, my sister, and I were sitting on the porch sharing a bottle of wine. She turned to me suddenly and said, "I was always jealous of you, you know." I blinked. "Jealous? Of what?" "Mom and Dad adored you. You were their miracle baby. I think I resented that sometimes. But now I realize how much they must have loved you to keep that secret all those years. They were terrified of losing you." Her words softened something inside me. Maybe we'd all been broken in different ways by the same secret. And maybe healing wasn't about choosing one family over another, but learning to hold both.
That realization came full circle a few weeks later when Laura invited me to her home for a small family dinner. As we sat around her kitchen table, me, her husband, my half-siblings, I felt an unexpected warmth spreading through me. These people weren't replacements. They were additions. Family, I realized, wasn't a fixed shape. It expanded and contracted, broke apart and reformed. It wasn't defined by biology or secrecy or even honesty. It was defined by love. Messy, imperfect, resilient love. When I left that night, Laura hugged me tightly and said, "I'm so proud of the woman you've become." And for the first time, hearing those words didn't make me think of betrayal. It made me think of grace. Still, when I got home, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, letting it all sink in. The overlapping truths, the years of silence, the new connections forming like delicate threads. My life wasn't what I thought it was. But maybe that was okay. Because sometimes finding out who you really are doesn't destroy you, it rebuilds you.
Forgiveness doesn't come like a sunrise. It doesn't appear all at once, bright and clear. It seeps in quietly, a slow, hesitant light after a long storm. In the months after meeting Laura, I began to understand that forgiving my parents wasn't about excusing what they'd done. It was about letting myself breathe again. Holding on to the anger felt like clutching broken glass. Every time I revisited the betrayal, it cut me a little deeper. But letting go meant facing the truth that my parents' silence had come from fear, not cruelty. And that realization was harder to swallow than the lie itself. I started therapy, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. My therapist, a calm woman named Dana with a voice like warm tea, asked me during our first session, "What are you hoping to find through all this?" I thought about it for a moment before answering, "Peace. Maybe a sense of who I actually am." She nodded. "Then maybe start by accepting that both versions of you are real, the daughter they raised and the child who was given away. They're not separate people, they're both you." That sentence became my compass. So I began rebuilding, not in grand gestures, but in small, quiet ways. I called my parents more often, not to rehash the past, but just to talk about normal things, work, the weather, how the neighbor's dog kept digging up the garden. Slowly, the tension that had once filled every conversation began to thin. One evening, I invited them to dinner at my apartment. It was the first time we'd been together outside their home since the revelation. I cooked lasagna, my mom's recipe, and when she took the first bite, she smiled through tears. She said, "This tastes just like mine." I replied, "Of course it does. You taught me." It wasn't forgiveness wrapped up in a neat bow, but it was something close. A few weeks later, Laura called to tell me that her oldest son, Mark, my half-brother, was getting married and wanted to invite me. My first reaction was hesitation. How could I show up at a family celebration where I was technically both a stranger and blood? But then I thought about what Dana had said, that both versions of me could coexist. So I said yes. The wedding was beautiful. String lights, a backyard filled with laughter, people who didn't quite know what to call me but smiled anyway. Laura introduced me to distant relatives as my daughter, Emily, and for the first time, the word didn't make me flinch. During the reception, I stood off to the side for a moment, watching everyone dance, and I realized something. I wasn't an outsider looking in. I was part of something larger than I'd ever known. Afterward, Laura and I sat under the stars, shoes kicked off, the sound of music fading in the distance. She said, "I wish I'd known you sooner." I admitted, "Me too. But maybe we met at the right time, when we were both ready." She nodded.
Maybe love has its own timing. That night, as I drove home, I thought about the strange symmetry of my life, how love had hidden the truth, but also how love had ultimately brought it into the light. Back in my apartment, I took out the manila envelope again, the one my dad had given me months ago, and flipped through the documents one last time. At the bottom was another letter I hadn't noticed before, folded so neatly it had probably been there for decades. It was from my dad. Dear Emily, if you're reading this, it means we finally told you the truth. I'm sorry it took us so long. Every day I wanted to tell you, and every day I lost my nerve. You were the best thing that ever happened to us. You made me a father. I hope someday you'll understand that our silence wasn't meant to deceive. It was meant to protect. We love you more than words can ever say. Dad. I sat there holding that letter, dripping tears onto the paper. For all the years I thought of him as a liar, I realized he was just a man terrified of losing his child. Forgiveness came quietly that night, not as a declaration, but as a sigh, the kind that loosens something deep inside you. Over time, my two families began to intersect in small, unexpected ways. My parents sent Laura a Christmas card that year, thanking her for the beautiful gift of our daughter, and Laurel mailed back a photo of the two of us at the wedding, arms around each other, smiling. We were rewriting the story, not erasing the pain, but editing it with compassion. It wasn't all perfect. There were still awkward conversations, moments of discomfort, flashes of resentment when I caught myself wondering what my life might have been if I'd grown up with Laura. But those thoughts didn't hurt as much anymore. They were just part of the landscape, familiar but not defining. In therapy, Dana once said, maybe betrayal and love aren't opposites. Maybe they're neighbors. Sometimes people hurt us most when they love us hardest. That stuck with me, because that's exactly what the story had become. A collision of love and fear, truth and silence, loss and belonging. One day, I visited my parents' house again. My mom had baked cookies and my dad was in the backyard fixing the old swing set. When I joined him, he handed me a wrench and said, I figured you might want to help. We worked side by side in silence for a while before he said quietly, I think about it every day, what we should have done differently. I looked at him, this man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had cheered at every school play, who had loved me with everything he had. I said, you did what you thought was best. And honestly, I think we all turned out okay. He smiled, a small, weary smile that said more than words could. When we finished fixing the swing, I sat on the swing, the metal creaking softly beneath me. He gave it a gentle push, just like he used to when I was little. In that moment, I felt the weight of everything, the lies, the truth, the forgiveness settle into something steady, something real. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I belonged to one family or the other. I belonged to both. And maybe that was the truest kind of belonging there is.
A year after I found out the truth, I hosted Thanksgiving for the first time in my own home. It wasn't a huge house, just a cozy little place with a mismatched set of chairs and a dining table that barely fit 8 people. But somehow, that day, it held a whole lifetime of history under one roof. My parents were there, of course. Mom bustling in the kitchen, Dad carving the turkey like it was a sacred ritual. My sister Emily was chasing her toddler around the living room, laughing breathlessly. And sitting across the table from them was Laura, my birth mother, passing the mashed potatoes to my mom as if they'd been sharing holidays for decades. If you told me a year ago that both of my mothers would be in the same room, smiling, I would have laughed in disbelief. But here they were, 2 women connected by one child and 1,000 acts of love. Different kinds of love,
but love all the same. The air was warm with laughter and the smell of cinnamon. It felt like something sacred was happening, not loud or dramatic, but quiet and healing. After dinner, I stood at the sink washing dishes, watching through the window as everyone sat around the fire pit in the backyard. My dad was showing Laura old family photos on his phone. My mom was holding Laura's hand, and Emily was telling stories that made everyone laugh. It struck me then. This was what truth could do. It could break you apart, yes, but it could also rebuild you into something stronger. Later that night, after everyone left and the house fell silent, I sat by the fireplace and opened my journal, the one I'd been writing in since the night I found out about my adoption. I flipped through the pages, tracing the evolution of my handwriting, my emotions, my understanding. The first entries were raw, filled with anger, confusion, and disbelief. Then came curiosity, then sorrow, and finally gratitude. I wrote one last entry that night. This isn't the story I thought I was living, but maybe it's the story I needed. Truth doesn't erase love, it deepens it. Family isn't something you're born into, it's something you choose to nurture every single day. As I set the journal down, my phone buzzed. A message from Laura. Thank you for letting me be part of today. You have no idea what it meant. I smiled. You always were part of it. We just didn't know it yet. That winter, I started volunteering at a local adoption support center, mostly listening to people's stories. Parents who were scared to tell their kids, adoptees who felt lost, birth mothers who still carried invisible scars. I didn't have perfect advice, but I had honesty, and sometimes that was enough. One evening after a group session, a young woman lingered as everyone else left. She looked about 19, nervous, restless, clutching a manila folder, just like the one my father had once handed me. I'm thinking about finding my birth mother, she said quietly. But I don't know if I can handle what I'll find. I smiled gently. Whatever you find, it'll be truth. And truth doesn't always hurt. Sometimes it heals. She nodded, eyes glistening. How do you know? She asked. Because it healed me, I said. That night, as I walked to my car, snow began to fall. Soft, slow, steady. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely at peace with where I came from. I'd spent so much time trying to define which family was mine, the one that raised me or the one that gave me life. But I'd learned that love doesn't fit neatly into boxes. It overlaps. It contradicts. It expands. Sometimes love is a secret kept too long. Sometimes it's a truth finally spoken. And sometimes it's both. A few months later, on my 34th birthday, I received 2 cards in the mail. The first was from my parents. It read, "You'll always be our greatest joy. We're proud of the woman you've become, stronger than we ever imagined." The second was from Laura. It read, "Thank you for letting me know you. The girl I let go became the woman I always hoped she would be." I pinned both cards on my refrigerator, side by side. 2 different handwritings, 2 different histories. One story. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and thought about everything that had happened. The pain, the forgiveness, the rediscovery. If someone had told me that uncovering a secret like this could bring more love into my life instead of less, I wouldn't have believed them. But that's exactly what happened. The truth didn't break my family. It expanded it. And somewhere deep down, beneath all the layers of confusion and healing, I realized something simple but profound. I wasn't adopted instead of being theirs. I was adopted into love twice. That's the unexpected gift. Not the secret, not the shock, but the truth that followed and the love that grew even larger because of it. When I think of my family now, I don't see a divide. I see a circle. Imperfect, evolving, but whole. And every time I look in the mirror, I no longer search for who I look like. I just see me. Not an adopted child, not a secret, just someone who finally understands that family isn't about blood or lies or even time. It's about love and the courage to tell the truth.